Welcome to the Fundamentals of Fitness, the podcast where we strip away the noise, the guilt, and the unrealistic expectations around health and fitness. And we focus on what actually works in real life. I'm Alison, your no-nonsense coach. So whether you're walking the dog, driving to work, training in the gym, or simply taking a bit of time for yourself, welcome. And thank you for being here. Today, we're going to talk about discipline, or more specifically, the myth of discipline. Because if you've ever found yourself saying, I just need more discipline, or I wish I was one of those disciplined people, then this episode's for you, because I think discipline gets far too much credit. And I think a lot of good people are beating themselves up unnecessarily because of it. So pop on those trainers or grab that cuppa and let's get right into it. I hear the word discipline almost every day. Clients say it, friends say it, people online say it. I know what I need to do. I just need more discipline. And on the surface, that sounds reasonable. After all, when we look at successful people, we're often assuming discipline is what separates them from everyone else. We look at athletes, we look at successful business owners, we look at people who have transformed their health, and we think they're disciplined. Maybe they are. But I don't think that's the whole story, because here's something I've noticed after far more than 10 years of coaching. Most people already know that they should be doing stuff. They already know they should move more. They already know they should eat more vegetables. They know they should probably drink more water. They know they should probably get to bed earlier. Knowledge isn't actually the problem, and in many cases, neither is effort. The people I work with are often trying incredibly hard. They're busy parents, busy professionals, people juggling work, family responsibilities, stress, finances, relationships, and they're still trying to prioritize their health. They're not lazy, they're not weak, and they're certainly not lacking in effort. So if that's true, why do so many people struggle with consistency? And that's what we're exploring today. Because I don't think the answer is simply we need to be more disciplined. I think the answer is much more practical than that. Why does discipline get too much credit? And let's start with this uncomfortable truth. Discipline is unreliable. Now, before anyone panics, I'm not saying discipline doesn't matter. Of course, it matters. Sometimes you absolutely need discipline. There'll be mornings where you don't feel like training. There'll be days where you're tired. There'll be moments where you'd rather stay on the sofa. And in those moments, discipline helps. But here's the problem. Many people have built their entire fitness strategy around discipline, and that's like building a house on sand, because discipline changes, it fluctuates, just like energy fluctuates, just like your mood fluctuates, and just like motivation fluctuates. Think about yourself for a moment. Are you exactly the same person every day? Of course not. Some days you feel fantastic, you wake up early, you've slept well, work is manageable, life feels under control, making healthy decisions feels easy. And then there are other days. You slept badly, work is stressful, the dog has been sick, the kids are arguing, your phone will not stop buzzing, your car needs something expensive doing, and suddenly everything feels harder, right? Including the gym, including meal prep, including going for a walk, including all those things that seemed easy a few days earlier. Doesn't that mean you suddenly become less disciplined? No, it means you're human. And this is where I think social media has done people a disservice, because social media loves discipline. You'll see posts saying no excuses, get up earlier, work harder, stay disciplined. And whilst that sounds motivational, it's not particularly helpful, because it assumes everyone is operating under the same circumstances, and they aren't. A single parent working 2 jobs, a stressed business owner, a professional athlete, a retired person, a university student. These people have completely different lives, yet the message is often the same. Just be more disciplined. But if discipline was the answer, wouldn't it have worked already? Most people listening to this have tried being disciplined. They've started diets, started gym programs, started walking plans, started running plans. And usually they'll start brilliantly for a week, maybe 2, sometimes even a month. Then life happens. And that's when the cracks appear, not because they suddenly stopped caring, but because the plan relied entirely on effort. And effort is expensive. Think about it this way. Imagine every healthy decision you make costs a little bit of energy. Getting up early, training, cooking, preparing food, tracking calories, making deliberate choices. Each one costs something, not a huge amount, but something. Now imagine you're already spending energy on work, family, finances, stress, relationships, responsibilities. By the end of the day, your energy budget is lower. And suddenly, the healthy choice becomes harder. Not impossible, harder. That's why people can feel incredibly motivated on Sunday evening and completely different by Thursday afternoon. It's not because they become lazy, it's because life happened. And this is where I think many people are being unfair to themselves. They see inconsistency and assume there is something wrong with their character. I lack discipline. I always fail. I can never stick to anything. But what if that's not true? What if the real issue isn't your character, but your system? Because here's something interesting. When I look at clients who succeed long term, the ones who keep the weight off, the ones who stay active, the ones who continue training for years, they're not usually the most disciplined people. They're often the people who've made consistency easier. They've reduced the friction, they've built routines, they've simplified decisions, and they've created structure. In other words, they've built a system. And that's where we're going next. Because if discipline isn't what keeps people going, what does? So if discipline isn't the answer, what is? Because clearly some people do stay consistent. Some people train for years. Some people maintain healthy habits. Some people seem to keep showing up even when life gets busy. And I don't think it's because they're superhuman. I think it's because they've stopped relying on motivation and discipline and started relying on systems. Now, I know the word systems can sound a bit boring, a bit corporate, a bit like something you'd hear in a business meeting. But stay with me. Because a system is simply something that makes the right thing easier to do. That's all it is. Think about brushing your teeth. Most people don't wake up every morning and have an internal debate about whether they're going to brush their teeth. They don't need motivation. They don't need discipline. They don't need a motivational quote on Instagram. They just do it. Why? Because it's become part of the system, part of the routine, part of daily life. Fitness becomes easier when it starts moving in that direction, not when every workout requires heroic effort, but when training becomes something that's simply part of what you do. And this is where many people make life unnecessarily difficult. They treat every workout as a fresh decision. Should I go? Should I not go? Do I feel like it? Am I motivated enough? Will I start tomorrow instead? And every time you ask those questions, you're creating another opportunity to talk yourself out of it. Because your brain loves convenience. Human beings are wired to conserve energy. If there's an easier option available, your brain will often suggest it. The sofa is easier, scrolling is easier, doing it tomorrow is easier. That's not weakness, that's biology, which means consistency becomes easier when we remove the need to constantly decide. Think about someone like Lewis Hamilton. People often look at elite athletes and think they must be incredibly motivated all the time. But elite performers aren't built on daily bursts of inspiration. It's built on routine, structure, preparation, systems. Lewis Hamilton doesn't wake up every morning and reinvent his approach to performance. There are routines around training, recovery, nutrition, sleep, preparation, because systems reduce uncertainty and systems reduce the amount of motivation required. Now, obviously, most of us aren't Formula One drivers, but the principle is exactly the same. The more structure you have, the less motivation you need. That's worth repeating. The more structure you have, the less motivation you need. So why does simplicity win? And one thing I've noticed over the years is that people often make fitness far more complicated than it needs to be. They think success requires the perfect program, the perfect diet, the perfect supplement stack, the perfect routine. But often the people who get the best results are doing remarkably simple things. Walking regularly, strength training consistently, eating reasonably well most of the time, sleeping as well as they can, repeating that for months and years. Nothing dramatic, Nothing flashy, just repeatable. And repeatable beats impressive every single time. Because the most effective plan in the world is useless if you can't stick to it. I had a client a few years ago who was constantly jumping between plans. 1 month she'd be doing keto, the next intermittent fasting. Then she'd try a detox. Then she'd try cutting carbs. Then she'd try training 6 days a week. Every plan worked for a little while and then it collapsed. And every time it collapsed, she blamed herself. She'd say, I've got no discipline. But when we look closer, the problem wasn't discipline. The problem was that every plan was asking too much. Too many rules, too much complexity, too much effort. And in simplifying everything, 3 strength sessions, a step target, protein at each meal. That was basically it. And you know what happened? For the first time, she stayed consistent. Not because she became more disciplined, because the system became easier. And that's a lesson I wish more people understood. The easier something is to repeat, the more likely you are to repeat it. People often imagine success. People are constantly pushing themselves. Always grinding, always motivated, always disciplined. But when you look closely, the most successful people often remove unnecessary difficulty. They simplify, they automate, they create routine, they reduce friction, because they understand something incredibly important. Success is not usually about doing extraordinary things occasionally. It's about doing ordinary things consistently. And consistency becomes easier when behavior fits your life, not when it fights against it. So think about your own routine for a moment. How much of your fitness journey currently relies on motivation? How much relies on I'll do it if it feels right? And how much relies on systems? Because those are very different approaches. One is fragile, one is reliable. And the people who stay consistent long-term usually aren't the people with the most motivation. They're the people with the best systems. And that brings us to what I believe is the most powerful piece of all. Because even systems become easier when they align with who you believe you are. And that's what we're going to talk about next. Identity. Because the people who stay consistent don't just have different habits. Very often, they have different self-image. Identity changes everything. And I think this is where things really start to click for people. Because even the best systems become easier when they match who you believe you actually are. Think about the language people use. I'm trying to get fit. I'm trying to lose weight. I'm trying to go to the gym. There's nothing wrong with those statements. But they position fitness as something separate from who you are, something you're attempting to do. Now compare that with, I'm someone who trains. I'm someone who looks after my health. I'm someone who goes for walks. It's subtle, but it's powerful. Because when a behavior becomes part of the identity, it stops feeling like a constant decision and it starts feeling normal. Take Cristiano Ronaldo. He doesn't wake up every morning asking himself whether he feels like being an athlete. Training isn't something he occasionally does. It's part of who he is. It's built into his identity. And that's why consistency becomes easier, not because every day is easy, but because the decision has largely already been made. One of the most common things I hear is, I'm just not a gym person. And I understand why people say it. Maybe they've had bad experiences. Maybe they've never felt comfortable in gyms. Maybe they feel intimidated. But here's the thing. Nobody is born a gym person. People become gym people by repeatedly going to the gym. Just like runners become runners by running and walkers become walkers by walking. Identity is built through evidence. Every time you repeat a behavior, you're giving your brain evidence that that's the type of person you are. I remember a client who spent months telling me I'm not a gym person. Then one day, without really thinking about it, she said, well, I normally train on Tuesdays. And I smiled because she stopped talking about training as something unusual. It had become normal. Part of her routine, part of her identity. And that's often where long-term consistency starts to happen. A lot of people think identity changes after the result. Losing the weight first, then you become a healthy person. Get fit first, then you'll become someone who exercises. But usually it works the other way around. You start acting like that person first. Then the results follow. Every workout, every walk, every healthy choice. It's a vote for the person you're becoming. Not a dramatic transformation, just a vote. And enough votes eventually change the outcome. So instead of asking, what do I need to achieve? Try asking, who am I becoming? Because the people who stay consistent long-term often aren't chasing motivation. They're simply acting in line with the person they believe they are. And once that identity starts to shift, consistency becomes much easier because you're no longer forcing yourself to do the thing. You're simply acting like yourself. So let's pull all this together, because by now, hopefully, you're starting to see that consistency isn't just about discipline. It's about having a system that works when motivation disappears, because motivation will disappear at some point for everyone. You'll get busy, you'll get stressed, you'll get tired, life will happen. And when it does, the question isn't, am I disciplined enough? The question is, does my system still work? Question 1, is my plan realistic? This is where I would start. Can you genuinely sustain what you're trying to do? Not for a week, not for a month, for a year. Because a lot of plans look great on paper. Train 6 times a week, meal prep every meal, track everything perfectly, never miss a workout. Sounds impressive. But can you actually sustain that? If not, the problem isn't you, the problem is the plan. Question 2, is it scheduled? One of the simplest ways to improve consistency is to stop hoping you'll find time. Schedule it. Because what gets scheduled tends to happen. What gets left to chance often doesn't. Whether that's a gym session, walks, meal prep, recovery, give it a place in your week. Question 3, is it enjoyable enough? Now, fitness doesn't have to be your favorite thing in the world. But if you hate every second of your plan, consistency becomes much harder. You don't have to run if you hate running. You don't have to do spin classes if you dread them. You don't have to train like somebody on Instagram. Find something you enjoy enough to repeat, because repetition is where results come from. Question 4, does it work on a bad week? This may be the most important question of all. Can your plan survive a difficult week, a stressful week, a busy week, a week where your sleep isn't great? Because that's when most plans fall apart. They're built for perfect conditions, and perfect conditions rarely exist. A good system should have a reduced version, a minimum standard, something that keeps you connected to the process. Maybe that means 2 sessions instead of 4, a shorter walk, a quick workout instead of a full one. It's not perfect, but it's still moving forwards. Question 5, does it rely on motivation? Be honest with yourself here. If your entire plan depends on feeling motivated, it's going to be inconsistent, because motivation is unreliable. Some days you'll have loads of it. Some days you'll have none. That's normal. The goal isn't to eliminate that. The goal is to have a system that works anyway. And that's exactly what successful people do. Not because they're special, not because they have unlimited willpower, but because they've made consistency easier. And if you've listened to this episode and taken one thing away, let it be this. Stop asking, how do I become more disciplined? Start asking, how do I make this easier to repeat? Because the people who succeed long-term are rarely the people who push hardest. They're the people who keep showing up again and again and again. Not perfectly, consistently. Discipline has a role. Of course it does. There will always be days when you need to do something despite not feeling like it. But discipline isn't the foundation. The foundation is your system, the routines you build, the environment you create, the habits you repeat, the identity you develop. Because when those things are in place, you need far less discipline than you think. And that's good news, because it means consistency isn't reserved for a special group of highly motivated people. It's available to everyone willing to build a better system. And if you've been beating yourself up for not being disciplined enough, maybe it's time to stop blaming yourself and start improving the system instead. And if you've enjoyed this episode, share it with someone constantly telling themselves they just need more discipline. Because chances are they don't. They just need a better system. And if you're enjoying the fundamentals of fitness, make sure you're following the show so you never miss an episode. And next time, we're going to dive into another huge fitness myth: why motivation is a terrible plan. Until then, train with structure, recover with intention, and build something that lasts. I will see you in the next one.